But I'm here till 6 this morning, and I have to say, quietly nervous, because sitting opposite me, that little laugh you just heard then, George Donikian. Good morning.
Very good morning, and I'm feeling buoyant because I've come almost straight from Amy Park in the heart of the city, and I've watched my beloved Heart trump Gold Coast in a rather ugly affair, but the important thing is I'm walking a little taller because we're carrying 3 points in the kitty, which is just wonderful.
A spring in your step.
Absolutely, and Fred, the captain, led the way. So I'm feeling very pumped.
Do you always go to?
No, I don't always go. I would love to spend more time at the football, whether it's Carlton, my beloved Blues, or whether it's the Melbourne Heart, or South Melbourne. Being an old president of the club, you never ever say goodbye to them. You're always a part of that rich tapestry that makes those football clubs come together. So no, I'd love to do more. You
refer to soccer as football, as we all should.
It's the world game. Look, I don't care for that sort of stuff. I used to, when I was younger, I used to care very much that we played football. You guys played Aussie rules.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I love my Carlton Football Club. I remember spending 7-8 years in South Australia, watching and getting a real understanding of what SANFL was all about. And I had a wonderful sports guy who was a marvellous mentor and taught me the insides and the nuances that make football so very special. I'm talking about Australian rules.
Yes.
And he gave me a sense. His name was Peter Marker, and Peter was one of the youngest captains for South Australia in the days when they used to beat Victoria quite regularly, and he used to remind me of that because he knew I was coming to Melbourne. And he said to me, when you go over there, you make sure you visit the cathedral, and enjoy your sport. And look, one of the great things about coming back 13 years ago now is that when I get a chance, the MCG is just fabulous, whether it's cricket, whether it's the Olympic soccer tournament, as it was in 2000 for me. And I actually got to call, for a little while there, I was the voice of the G during the Olympic soccer tournament, and I called Australia, Italy. It was just magnificent. I got a chance to play with the voices and the names.
Would you do sports commentary if the opportunity arose?
That's a very good... Look, I did it and have done it, and I love it.
You know where you'd be particularly good, I have to say, and this is just going on...
what you know.
Going on what I know. As somebody who is 40 years old, who first sort of really took notice of you on Graham Kennedy's show.
Ah, yes.
And the parodies that Steve Vizard did of you, you would be great in the tennis, because the pronunciations of those names.
Channel 7, are you listening? Now, look, I would love to do the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
Could you imagine trackside, and the world record holder for the 800 metres is Jarmila Kratochvílová, and you just embrace it and do it with all the verve and cunning you can muster.
He's still got it, people.
Well, you know what it is? I had a magnificent time in the early days of SPS, and I'm hearing that the subtitling unit is about to be outsourced, which I hope I'm wrong when I say that. I hope they never do that, because that was a resource that I fell in love with, and they saw me as their conduit.
Yeah.
And they would come up to me during the day because they knew I'd have a very difficult read that particular night, because I was still learning this business. I had never been a newsreader or a news broadcaster. I had certainly worked at doing sport and stories and bringing them to air, but it was a very different thing being a news anchor. And I remember Bruce Gingell saying to me, "Don't worry, we're trying to do something brand new that hasn't been tried. Just put your own imprimatur on it." And that was, for me, a chance to flex. I have a good ear, compliments of my mum and dad. Dad speaks 7 languages seamlessly.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. It's freaky good he is. He can go Armenian, Turkish, Greek, one side, French, Italian, Spanish. You go, what? How does he do it? And English. His English is... My girlfriends would ring, and half an hour later I'd hear the phone ring, and half an hour later he'd give me the phone. He'd been on talking to them for half an hour, chatting them up. I'm going, what? You can't do that. Dad, you're my father.
Speaking 7 languages, my experience should tell that if he's that good at that, he must be lousy at something else. Could he back a car or bake
spectacular.
a cake?
He remains. He's 84.
Yeah.
Coming up 85, and let me tell you, there's nothing he can't fix.
Yeah.
Because that generation had to.
Yeah.
They didn't have any option plays. They couldn't go down the road to the corner store and buy something or, order a part in. So they grew up in the... Dad was born in 27, so you imagine that time when Europe was going through tough times. They were recovering from the Depression, and then they got into the wars and the occupations. So they had to survive, and that's where you learnt the languages. That's why you learnt them, because they were an extra key of insurance.
Okay,
and that's what it was. And Dad learned very quickly when he arrived at Port Melbourne, Station Pier, 1949.
Yeah.
And I bought a house across the road from Station Pier 13 years ago, and when he came down to visit me, he went, I can't believe you did this. Fabulous. Just brought back wonderful memories for him. But that's where they landed. He came in an Italian ship called the Sebastian Cabot, and they couldn't or wouldn't disembark them in Sydney, so they had to land at Station Pier, and they put them on a special train and chuffed them up. Remember, Albury, they had to change the gauge.
Yeah.
So a couple of days later, no canteen on the train. They arrived at Central Railway Station, and Dad learned very quickly, even if he had a £20 note, which was an extraordinary amount of money in those days, even waving that around didn't get too much attention. So he learnt from day one that if he didn't have a language, and English was the one that he needed to learn, he would suffer terribly. And he learnt, and he's very, very, very good.
Wow.
No schooling, no adult migrant education classes, thank you very much.
Just paid attention and learnt.
Yeah. He used to have a little notebook, I can remember as a young boy. And I said, what are you doing, Dad? And he'd write down a word that he hadn't heard before, and he'd learn what it meant, and he would include it in his vocabulary and in his conversation for the next few days.
So it must be a genetic thing then, because you, with your uncanny ability to pronounce words that I couldn't think of doing in my wildest dreams, is that part of it?
It's interesting you say you wouldn't consider it in your wildest dreams. It's never been an obstacle. It's always been a challenge.
Yeah.
Whatever language it is. And I learnt very early on from the great subtitling unit at SBS, or ON28 as it was in those days. They said to me, try and take on board the lyric content. Try and hear it as a song. And if you can hear the song, then you can go a long way to creating a great return of the language. So it was, for example, I'd say things like, Signor, signore, benvenuti a tutti. And because I could hear it in the background. Κυρίες και κύριοι, σας θέλουμε να σας βοηθήσουμε με αυτό το καινούριο πρόγραμμα. So it was a case of, I could hear it, I could reproduce it.
Yeah.
And I learnt that it was Wiesbaden, it was Garmisch-Partenkirchen, it was Székesfehérvár in Hungarian. And we had, one of the coaches at South Melbourne was the great Ferenc Puskás, the great, they call him the Galloping Major. And when you saw him when he arrived, I was working at Channel 9, Wide World of Sport, and they sent me down to do this story, this colour piece, on this, the man they call the Galloping Major. Well, it was one of the greatest thrills of my life to see this 65-year-old man in a suit, showing up his young chargers, that, no, I'll show you how to do it. And they were taking corners, and he's got rolled up and crashed the ball into the back of the net. The goalkeeper went, where'd that come from? And he did it again and again. And suddenly all the chatter had gone, and they realised they were in the midst of something very special. Didn't take too long, they won a premiership that year. So there you go. So there's some wonderful memories and some terrific things that I've learned over the years. And Ferenc Puskás gave me a sense of the nuances that make Hungarian the special language it is. You read the names and it means one thing, but if you say them properly, suddenly you engage with the audience. And that was our effort, that extra effort to learn the name properly. The other day I heard one of the broadcasters talk about Thessaloniki. No, how did he say it? The word is, Thessalonica.
Yeah.
Is the expression or the name of the city in northern Greece that we know very much. But he called it something totally different, and I looked at it and I thought to myself, we still have a little bit to learn. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge.
Now, we need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to ask you about, you mentioned your parents coming out here. I want to delve back a little further and find out more about your parents.
Okay.
Before George was brought to us. So we'll do that on the other side of this. 12 on 3AW. George Donikian, my special guest this morning. And we've heard George's parents arriving out here at Station Pier in Melbourne. But I want to go back, George, and ask, where did they meet? Do you know?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. My forebears on my father's side came from a place called Asia Minor, which is Ottoman Turkey. A place called Izmir, or Smirni. And during the 1920s, they had suffered some terrible losses. Dad's family lost about 100-odd people. There was a purge, call it what you will. The Turkish government to this day doesn't accept that there was a series of actions that cost a great many citizens their lives and their treasures and their fortunes. And my grandfather, Ashot, or Jack, left Izmir for a sanctuary, a safe sanctuary, and it happened to be Athens. That's where my father was born. And he met this beautiful Greek girl. Her name was Vivian, or Paraskevi, Vivi, from that. And they decided that if they survived World War II and they survived the Greek Civil War, they would decide to go somewhere else. And the somewhere else was supposed to be South Africa.
Yeah.
But one of the uncles who had left before the war had said to them, I don't like the look of what's happening here. He had seen the emergence of apartheid.
Yep.
And he sensed that Australia might be the place to be. And that's where he encouraged them to move. And Dad came, as I said, in 1949 with his father, his stepmother, because he'd lost his mother earlier, his grandmother, my great-grandmama, called Marise, who used to speak to me in Turkish because she had suffered such a great trauma in Turkey. She didn't want to let on when myself or my brother were out in the garden or in the parks playing.
Yeah.
She would speak to us only in Turkish for fear that she revealed to all and sundry that we were Christians. So the pain and the trauma was so real for her, she would speak to me in Turkish. So I had Mum and Dad speaking to me in Greek. I had my uncle and auntie on my father's side speaking to me in Armenian, and I had my great-grandmother speaking to me in Turkish. It was wonderful. No English.
No, I had a teacher at school who, Mr. Barnes, who spoke English, and he was married to Frau Mögerlein Barnes, who only ever spoke German at home. So their children, and they did that deliberately so that their children would grow up just knowing both languages. My wife is of Italian stock. She was born here, but her mother was Italian and spoke no English when she first came out. And so my wife grew up knowing Italian. Yep. But she never spoke it. She was always just that shy or embarrassed about speaking the language.
It's like a barrier comes up. And my daughter, who's 25, 26, I took her to Greece for the opening of the Olympic Games in 2004 with her first cousin, my godson, Andrew. Yeah. They're a couple of years apart. And they didn't want to come to Greece. You know, they thought, yeah, okay. When they got there, when we toured the Greek islands, when we came and were prepared for the opening ceremony, my daughter turns to me and says, Dad, pinch me. I said, why? This is magnificent. I said, why is that? She says, the world is here in Athens. I want to ring Mum. I said, you ring Mum. She'll be awake. She'll be watching this on whatever network is playing at home.
Yeah.
And they spoke from Athens in the middle of the night, early in the morning. And indeed, the two of them didn't want to go to sleep that night after leaving the Olympic Stadium. And we went to a beautiful suburb in Athens called Kifisia. And we sat in some of the beautiful bars and cafes and literally met and talked to the world citizens who had come to embrace the Olympic Games. The games that they said would never happen.
Yeah,
they happened.
yes.
They were great.
There was a lot of... I find it interesting, or I found it interesting at the time. There was a lot of... I don't want to use the term racist, because it wasn't meant with any hatred,
No,
but there was a lot of stereotyping.
Yes.
Is that the right word?
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
Of us over here as Australians saying, the Greeks the Greeks will never get it all done.
No.
Or if they do, it'll be a slap-happy, bang-up job. But they got it done.
And you know what? The last moments of the preparation was beautifully woven into their opening ceremony. And you had this gang of guys in overalls rock up, and you thought to yourself, oh, please, get those cleaners and those painters off the set so we can start. But actually, they were actors.
The start of it.
Basically creating or finishing off the so-called gag, and then saying, ladies and gentlemen, they pulled out their overalls and they went, here we are. And yes, we did it.
We made it.
And it was beautiful. Yeah. And it was, just not only charming, it was magnificent, it was brave, it was a lot of things. And, we were chuffed in a beautiful way. Now,
back to your parents?
Yeah, back to Mum and Dad. They met, as I said, growing up in Greece, in Athens, in a place called Nea Ionia, which is right in the inner suburbs of Athens. And they fell in love, and as I said, they needed to survive the Greek Civil War. Mum's family lost the man I'm named after, my uncle George. I never got to meet him. He was killed during the Greek Civil War, as was my grandfather Jerry. And they needed to start fresh, and they came to this beautiful sanctuary down under called Australia. And my father from day one said to me, I want you to embrace, and I want your brother to embrace it, and I want you to be first-class Australians, but very proud citizens and proud members of an Armenian Greek heritage, because I couldn't hide it. You can't have a name like Donikian and think you're Italian. You know?
No, that's fair enough.
Exactly right.
Now, you came along when? Are you the oldest?
Only child? Yeah. The first one out of the blocks, and had an enormous responsibility as number one. And I can remember the great joy when I launched SBS, or ON28, the World News. That was the day I ceased being Andrew's son, and he became George's father. So, yeah, great moments.
So the younger siblings?
My brother Stephen, 22 months difference. He's a postie in New South Wales.
Yeah.
All my family are New South Wales folk. My daughter lives up there with her mum. And I try and get up there and see them as much as I can, and they come down and see me. But as they get older, that becomes a bit more difficult.
Does he look similar to you? Has he?
My brother?
Yes.
If I shave my moustache off, yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering if, with the surname Donikian, and if he looked like you, would he?
As younger guys, we used to get a lot of flack because our cousins, blue-eyed blondes, they were born in Greece, and not a word was said to them, right? Because they were blue-eyed blondes.
Yes.
And my brother and I, who were born here, were called all manner of things.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yes. Especially at the beach.
Was that tough when you were young, getting the name flinging?
I remember. We didn't know any better, and it was a case of, you girded your loins, it toughened you up, yes, it did.
I recall, I was born in 71 when I was at school in the 70s. There was Vince and Ilio, two kids at my school, who were quite mercilessly picked on.
Oh.
And I proudly say I never took part in it, but ashamedly say I never made an effort to stop it. I just stayed back of the line.
We were still learning. I can remember, I've got some great friends of mine who have made me part of the extended family in Melbourne. Arthur Kilius, Costas Kilius, and the youngest brother, Les Kilius. And you say to me, Les? And the answer is yes. His name is Odysseus, Ulysses. And when he went to school, the teacher went to Costas and said, so Costas, you're the oldest. Your youngest brother, what's his name? Odysseus. And she goes, I beg your pardon? He said, Ulysses. She goes, Les, that'll do. So I remember the first time I met Les at Bob Janes Stadium at Albert Park. It was a South Melbourne game. I think we were playing Melbourne Knights or something. Costa says to me, my brother's over there behind the goalmouth. And I could see him. Bald, handsome boy. And I said, he doesn't look like a Les. And sure enough, he's not a Les, but there you go. He's had to wear that tag for a lifetime.
Now, school years, good? You do well?
Look, sport for me was the great difference. I had a fantastic start. I embraced cricket. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine a Greek boy? No? Greek Armenian boy, opening batsman, wicketkeeper. Oh, he can actually catch. Oh, he might be able to bat. So that got me on side with a lot of those people, and there's a lot of those students who early on were not sure who or what I was about. Mm. And then came the football season, and I played football. And then came the athletic season, and I was an athlete. So suddenly, 2 blues, then three bits of the sporting calendar were things that I embraced, and it just made me feel like I was part of the school, part of my teams, and of course part of the community.
The sport can be good that way, bonding.
It's fantastic.
A great bonding tool.
It is. It's tribal in some respects, and yes, it's an us and them syndrome, but I think what it does, especially for those of us who were new then, it showed to all and sundry that if you were prepared to make a commitment, and you were prepared to, roll up your sleeves and throw yourself into it, you could make an effort and make an impact. And that was all people, I think, really wanted of you. They didn't want you just going through the motions. Yeah. But once they saw us, screaming, how's that? Without the trace of a Greek accent, they were impressed. Mind you, I had to play, I had to bat one day against a young Croatian boy, or Serbian, sorry. His name is Len Detanovic. He played for Australia. You might know him better as Lenny Pascoe.
Really?
Yeah.
The Pascoe?
Yeah. Yep. The first couple of overs I didn't see because his offsider was Jeff Thompson.
Oh, okay.
They were bowling like the wind. And and Lenny had this peculiar quality about him. When he got excited, he would speak involuntarily in other languages and remind me that I shouldn't be playing cricket. So it was a wonderful duel.
That's a great initiation to be...
let me tell you, I found out all about fast bowlers and opening batsmen.
Yeah, you would have.
Oh, yeah, very quickly.
Now, while still at school, first crush?
First crush, Annette Funicello on the Musketeers, on the Mickey Mouse Club. She was just heavenly.
Did you ever get to meet her within your media career?
You know what? I had hoped that one day it would happen, and it never did. But I did get to go out with my own star many years later when she came to Australia to launch the Starlight Foundation and make a couple of movies down under. Her name was Emma Sams, Lord Samuel's daughter. And she was the girl who played Fallon in Dynasty.
Oh, okay.
And I was asked to chaperone her while I was at Channel 9. Sam Chisholm, thank you very much for that. And the next 18 months were just magical.
Fabulous. All right, now, anything else from school we should know that we haven't heard from? At what stage, when you were at school, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do as a career?
No, I wanted to play sport. Yeah. But as far as my father and mother were concerned, all good ethnic boys and girls work at becoming either doctors or lawyers. I missed out on both counts.
Did that interest you at all?
Well, look, a part of it did, but it was to please my parents. What I really wanted to do, and what I found I had been very good at, was sport. And I represented New South Wales schoolboys in a curtain raiser before Manchester United's game against New South Wales side at the Sydney Cricket Ground in front of about 55,000 under lights, and I was mesmerised by the moment and by the support we got from the crowd, and we had a great game. I personally had a blinder, and as a goalkeeper I got to save a penalty in the last few minutes, and then Sir Bobby Charlton and Nobby Stiles. Now remember, they had just won the World Cup for England in 1966, and they were in Australia in 1967-68 during that time there, and they picked 8 schoolboys to trial at Old Trafford, and I was one of those.
Is that right?
But Dad said, "No way, Jose. Not over my dead body." Mind you, a few years ago, I remember sitting with Dad and reflecting, and he said to me, "What was I thinking?" But it was a different time. Very different time.
Do you reckon you would have had a chance to go on and...
Well, it's not me talking. It's Josef Englosch, who was my coach at school. He had come to Australia to improve his English, and he became one of our great school teachers there. And he immediately got me to move from my then football club, which was Sydney Olympic, to Prague, which was his club. And he was the man who, a few years later, left and went to Europe and took Czechoslovakia to its first European Championship, 1976, and he was also the man who took a young Mark Viduka from Dinamo Zagreb and took him to a place called Celtic and gave him that wonderful start, which eventually became the beginning of his career in the EPL. He played for Leeds and then on to Middlesbrough and Newcastle and so on.
Fabulous.
So a great talent who said to me, "You come and play with our club and you'll be the next Australian goalkeeper." So it was people of that calibre, people like Joe Marston, people who I trusted immensely, who felt that I had the technique and the goods. But sporting injuries are terrible things, and I got a shoulder injury at a time when it was absolutely vital. They couldn't repair it. The technology hadn't arrived just yet, you see.
Does it still play up?
It does, and I have to be very careful. And I remember years later, I was living with a beautiful girl who was Victor Chang's senior operating nurse.
Okay.
And over dinner one day, I said to Victor, "You know, I have this shoulder. Should I have the operation?" He said to me, "If you don't have to have it, don't."
Oh, really?
So there you go. There's a man who made his money and his reputation.
He wanted the weekend off.
Yeah, well, no, I think he understood. If you can avoid opening up the wounds or the problems, you don't do it. If you have to do it, that's another thing.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do it, and I now have worked hard at repairing it, or not to repairing it, but strengthening it and giving it a chance to hold its form.
Now, we need to break again, but on the other side of the break, I want to find out about your media career and how that got started.
Okay.
So we will...
Scary moment, that one.
Okay, we'll find out shortly. 18-1 on 3AW. Loving having George Donikian in the studio. Fascinating, and there is so much more I want to find out in the next 17 or so minutes, George.
Very much. You touched on something very important. I had a terrible stutter when I was 15 or 16, and in order to get rid of it, I had to practice.
Is that right?
Absolutely. I was very shy in front of girls, you see.
You would never know.
Very Well, the trick is I slow it down by that much.
You slow it down. You speak faster than I can.
Yeah.
Then you're slowing it down.
Yeah. On the inside.
Frank, thank you. Thank you for the call. We do have to move on because I've got so much more to ask.
I'm learning something every day. That's part of the...
yes, a conspiracy theory believer. Good on you, Ken. Thank you for the call. Look forward to chatting to you again tomorrow night.
Isn't it amazing how time flies when you're having fun?
Yes. Now, George, I want to ask about your TV and radio career.
Sure.
You were an aspiring sportsman, doing well, had the shoulder injury.
Yep.
What was the turning point?
The injury. The doctors at the time said to my father, "Andrew, we can't really do anything with George's shoulder at the moment. We can try this and that and the other." And Dad said at the time, "If you can't guarantee it, we're not going to explore those opportunities." So it very quickly became apparent to me that my sporting aspirations had dried up and had gone, and I'd have to look at my studies, because that's the wrong sort of thing to say to a 16, 17-year-old who had just been told that his sporting dreams had been crushed. So I got very angry with a lot of things, not so much my parents, but I just felt the world had given me a blow. Yes, a backhander, so to speak. And I went and did a whole bunch of different things with no real focus. And suddenly I met a group of radio people who were at 2SM, which was then, as they say in radio parlance, the Tower of Power.
Yes. And
2SM being this fantastically successful radio station in Sydney, had a radio school. And I thought, hey, I'll go and try this radio school out and see if there's anything in there for me. And lo and behold, I was captivated by this opportunity to tell stories with a microphone. And I remember within a matter of weeks, I turned to my father and said, Dad, I want to be in radio. He said to me, what makes you think that you're going to do it well enough to succeed and make a career out of it?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know, but I just feel it has my name on it. And sure enough, within a matter of months, I'd got a job offer in Queensland, and they were prepared to let me use the desk and run the studio with minimum flying hours.
Yes.
But I had to travel from Sydney to Cairns in far north Queensland, actually to Mareeba, where the studios were based on the Atherton Tableland. And I got to do the job for 22 months, sent a couple of audition tapes out, back into Sydney, and got them. Difference being that this time they weren't prepared to have a George Donikian. They were happy to employ a George Brown or a George White or a George Green, as Mike Webb, Graham Webb's brother, said to me at the time. George, if you can do George Brown, any colour George, but Donikian's too ethnic for me, I'll give you a job tomorrow. So I rang my father and said, Dad, this is the state of play. Where do I go? He says, change your name. I said, what? He says, yeah, you can always change it back. So I took one letter out on his recommendation, and suddenly, instead of being Donikian, it became Donikian. So it sounded a bit Irish. Yeah, okay. Webby said, no worries, you've got the job. So 6 weeks into the job on air, reception rings and says, there's a convention happening in Sydney, and there's an organising committee, and they'd love you to talk to them. I said, sure. What's it to do with? Didn't know, but it was about St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, how fabulous.
Yeah. And I've rocked up on the morning after agreeing to join them for St. Patrick's Day, to be part of their celebrations, and they've gone, took one look and they went, you're not Irish. I said, and I've gone, to be sure, too. Anyway, had a wonderful time with them. They were so sweet, and made me the honorary patron for the next 8 years. 6 months on, I walk into a press conference where Bruce Gyngell is telling the Australian media about this new television station that's moments away from starting. It was going to be the IMBC, the Independent Multicultural Broadcasting Corporation.
Yeah.
But it was stalled, stillborn in fact, because the commercial broadcasters got wind of the fact it was going to have ads, and they stopped it in the Senate. And Prime Minister today was Mr. Malcolm Fraser, and he turned to Bruce Gyngell. He says, what do we do now? He says, you're the Prime Minister. Invoke the Special Broadcasting Act. And from that moment, we started creating this quasi-government entity that evolved and became SBS. Yeah. But I went to air as Channel O, and I remember saying to Bruce Gyngell, days before we went to air, I feel uncomfortable. He said, what do you mean? I said, on radio, I could hide, I could be anybody. I was George Donikian, but on television, I can't be George Donikian. He said, well, no problem. Use your real name. So I went on and said, welcome to Channel O and 28. I'm George Donikian. And the Sydney Morning Herald wrote the next day, Donikian changes his name to make it sound more ethnic.
Oh, how fabulous.
There you go. And Gyngell was fantastic. He said, it's just be yourselves. And I went back to those wonderful days of being a sportsman, and it was my team, the so-called ethnic team of broadcasters, the Tellywogs, as Mike Willesee and some of his cohorts called us at the time. And I remember Ray Martin introduced me on his program, The Midday Show, and his producer came up and said, how would you like Ray to introduce me? Introduce you? And I said, well, look, just from multicultural television, George Donikian. And Ray turned around and said, from ethnic TV, here's George Donikian. I said, thanks, Ray. Thanks. There you go. Some people get it, some people don't.
No. Now, how long were you there?
8 years at SBS. Before I realised that in order to stretch myself and in order to give SBS a chance to grow, I had to leave. People don't understand. My father still hasn't forgiven me for leaving because he had this wonderful platform. He used to sit there at night and watch. And suddenly he had to say goodbye to me. But I said to him, Dad, unless George leaves, there's no room for Mary and no room for anyone that comes after that.
Yeah.
So I then went and tested myself in the commercial television world at Channel 9. Unfortunately, I got there at a time when Sam Chisholm was about to be snatched and taken to England to boost Murdoch's B-Sky B, which was this losing platform, and Sam turned it around and made it a winning platform where they made an awful lot of this green stuff. And I then realised that my time was short at 9. I did 3 wonderful years there, doing all manner of things: wide world of sports, the State of Origin, Rugby League, which was terrific, Graham Kennedy's Coast to Coast, Sports Sunday with Max Walker, and I got to see so much of Australia and the world. I went to the World Cup for Channel 9, and then after that I realised that if I was going to pursue a news position and make it my own, it had to be in another network, and it was Channel 10. And 21 years at 10 came to an end about 2 months ago. Well, so we now see what happens next.
Well, before we talk about 10,
sure.
We've only got 6 minutes left in the hour, but the majority of people listening now at this time of night would know Graham Kennedy from his early days on television and have followed his career right through.
Sure.
So it would be remiss of me not to ask, what was he like? How did you go on the show? The whole thing, one of my fondest memories of television was you shaving your moustache off.
Well, I said to him, you're the executive producer, I'd like to shave the moustache. He says, what? It suits you. I said, Graham, I've been told I have to have this moustache, and my contract says you control my image. But I'd love for you to say, hey, shave it off if you want. And he said to me, okay, you can shave it off. What he didn't tell me was they set up a television crew with a small camera, and they filmed me shaving. And they proceeded to show that moment before I introduced the news that night. He said, ladies and gentlemen, for the latest news from the National 9 News Desk, let's cross to George Donikian sans moustache. And then he showed the sequence of me shaving, and little did I know, Steve Vizard and his cronies were watching Graham Kennedy create a bit of magic, and they thought, wow, what a great gag that's going to be. And lo and behold, when they launched a few months later, they thought they were going to have this running gag of a newsreader shaving not only his mo, but his hair and his underarms and his
I remember
nether regions, you name it.
I remember the sketch.
And I went and played in a celebrity golf tournament with Greg Norman. And Greg sat there, and he had seen the sequence the night before, and he said to me, as I was taking the club back, he said, by the way, do you feel a draft at all as you take the club back? And of course the crowd went wild, and I managed to slice the ball into the water, which was wonderful.
Is that the most...
Kennedy was dangerous.
Yeah.
Had the memory of 15 elephants, and had an understanding about focus and how to turn an ordinary story into something magical.
Yes.
And that's what I learned. I learned that he was a wonderfully hard-working vaudevillian who knew that timing was special, and he helped us to learn a bit more about the industry. And I remember one of his great lines all the time, every night. He'd walk past me and he'd say, Donikian, a good show's a quick show. And he'd rock past me, and I was in makeup chair, and I'd turn to the girls and say, quick, let's go. And that was it.
Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Yep. Channel 10, all those years there, how did that come about, and was there a highlight?
Many highlights. Diana having to break the news to Australia first up. I happened to be in Sydney doing the national news on the weekend for all the 10 bulletins across the country during the mid to late 90s, and that was a wonderful time, because imagine popping up in Brisbane, in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Adelaide, and in Perth, and in Canberra.
Yeah.
And of course then we had the sudden news from Paris that there'd been a car accident. And lo and behold, we found out halfway through the morning that that accident had indeed claimed the life of Princess Diana, and then going first to air with that, and then covering that story for the next week or two, which was just amazing. But all the stories of those early days, the attempted assassination on the Pope, the attempted assassination on Reagan, the assassination of John Lennon, all these stories, we lived them. And they were very, very much more impactful.
Now, you wound up with 10 a couple of months back now?
Yep. I decided that 10 were going through a lot of changes. I didn't want to be in the way, let them do what they needed to do. They wanted me to go back to Adelaide and push that platform to new heights. And I had given Adelaide away 13 years ago in order to create the news hub in Melbourne. And I'd married a Geelong girl. And there was no way that I was going to say to Di, we're going to Adelaide. So I thanked them for their time together, and stepped out the door to chase new goals, and that's where we remain today.
Is there anything you want to do that you haven't done yet?
There's a part of me that wants to call sport again.
Yeah?
Like I did in the early days of Channel O and 28, when you were allowed to do all manner of things, before everyone started realising that we've got to protect this asset called the news anchor, and they stopped hiving me off to the sports department.
Yeah.
There's a part of me, and radio is another medium that I love and hold dearly, but there's got to be a platform that suits you and gives you a chance to do what you can do as well as you can.
We'll look forward to the next exciting chapter in George Donikian's life.
Simon, thank you, mate.
It's been fabulous. Thank you, George.
Been a thrill.